Hi, I'm Rob.
And I'm Rob.
And this is Ask Rob and Rob.
Welcome to Ask Rob and Rob. It's another week of answering your property questions. It works pretty well as long as you send your questions in. So if you do have something on your mind and you'd love to know an answer, the way to get it across to us and to get on the show is so easy.
It certainly is. It's all in one safe place. And that is the Property Hub website. Go to propertyhub.net/ask and you can get your question in there. There's a few ways you can do it, and you can even get your question to appear in the Sunday Times as well. Now, that's very exciting, but what is more exciting is that we have a question to answer right here, right now. And that first question is in from Alex.
Hi, Rob and Rob. Thank you for taking my message. My question starts at the very beginning with what area or strategy I should pursue in property. My background is that I'm a commercial property solicitor. And so my network is in commercial property. I have clients there. I have other lawyers in commercial property, accountants, surveyors, valuers, etc. And was wondering if I should really use that expertise in the investment side of things. However, commercial property, as you'll know, requires a lot more upfront capital than residential, typically. And the lending on commercial properties are normally no more than 60% of the value of the property, compared to resi, which typically 75%. So my question is, should I start in commercial property investing, given that that's where my knowledge and expertise are, or should I start in residential property, given there's less upfront capital to start with? I guess my conundrum is that ultimately I would have liked to be in commercial property because that's where my knowledge and expertise are. But it looks like, given my position in terms of financing, I'll have to start in residential. I'd just like to know your thoughts on this. Thank you very much.
Alex, thank you for your question. This is a really, really interesting one. I love this show because after all these years, you still get new types of questions that we've never answered before, or a version of it. Now, my gut instinct here says stick to what you know. I'm obviously a huge fan of residential property, but with all that knowledge that you've accumulated over the years, it puts you in a unique position. Most people will not be able to operate at a level you can within commercial property. So having that knowledge, having that experience puts you at a really, really good place. You'll be able to assess deals quicker than most people, and you'll be able to see those dodgy property deals that you don't want to get involved in quite quickly as well. So there's a lot to be said for investing where your knowledge is and just doubling down, tripling down on that. However, if you are keen to invest in residential property, and there's lots of reasons that I could give you why you should beyond just the amount you need to put in, but if you do want to do it, maybe just do a small project to begin with, just a little tester, and see how much of your knowledge is transferable. I imagine quite a lot of it is. So you may find actually that the knowledge that you've got in commercial property really helps you as a residential investor as well. So it's not to say don't do it, but if you're going to do it, start small, see how you find it, see how much of that knowledge is transferable, and then once you've built that confidence, or you've learned it's not for you, you can make a better decision on whether to pursue it any further. So it's not to say don't do it, just start small, do a tester, learn your lessons, and go from there.
Okay, let's have our next question now. This one comes from Alan.
Hello, Rob and Rob. Thanks for maintaining this very informative podcast. It definitely fills a hole that I didn't know I had when I first listened to it a couple of years ago. My question relates to property finance. More than a decade ago, I bought 3 houses, each for 90 to 100k, and I've let them out. I had some cash, but most of the finance was by taking a mortgage out on the more expensive property that I lived in and which I owned outright. At that point, I could get an interest-only mortgage and a much lower rate than with a buy-to-let mortgage. As we know, the interest rates had remained low until last year, and my most recent fix finished at the end of the year, so I needed a plan. I retired in 2020 and was considering downsizing the house I lived in anyway, so earlier this year I moved house, which enabled me to pay off the mortgage and mostly avoid the increased finance costs. Now on to the question. I understand that interest payments can be offset against my tax bill, where my marginal rate is 20%, but in my situation, with the increased cost of borrowing, I'm judging that there's no real point in borrowing if I don't have to. Does this strategy make you wince? And if so, why?
Alan, thanks for the question. I'm going to answer it in two parts. So the first part I'll summarise as, does borrowing make sense anymore? Which I think is something that a lot of people will be asking in the context of rates being higher. And it is a shock, I get that, to see rates starting with a 4 or a 5 when you were previously used to a 2 or in some cases even a 1. But at those levels, which let's remember are historically normal, borrowing can still make sense. Nothing's really changed. It's just about running the numbers at the point that you invest. If you buy a property and you finance that property with borrowing at a rate of, call it 5%, if you're making a profit on holding that property month to month, so rent comes in, your mortgage goes out, all your other expenses go out, and you're left with profit at the end, then in a way, you're not paying any interest cost, if you see what I mean, because it's being paid for out of the rent. So effectively, you're borrowing that money, and yes, it's costing you profit relative to what you would have if you'd used all cash. But if you'd use cash, then there's an opportunity cost to that as well, because you couldn't do something else with that cash. So effectively, the cost of the borrowing isn't anything to worry about as long as you're profitable. And then what it does still give you access to, whatever rate you're paying for it, is the benefit of leverage as property prices go up. So if property prices continue to go up over time, as over the long term you would expect them to, then the return that you're making on your cash will of course be greater the smaller amount of your own cash that you've put in. And that's kind of the magical thing about leverage that's true whatever rate you're paying for it. So generically, of course, if the numbers add up at the point of purchasing, then borrowing still makes perfect sense. But part two, does it make sense for you to take out any additional borrowing? Well, probably not. It depends on your goals, of course. Do you want to lever up your portfolio to expose yourself to potentially more gains, to potentially buy more, to expand? But the flip side of that is taking on more risk, because having debt is always riskier than not having debt, however well you control it. And everyone will have a different answer to that. But given that you're retired, given that you've downsized, given that you made the decision to pay off the mortgage that you had, it doesn't sound like you're somebody who's ready to go into a big growth phase with your investments. I could be wrong. I don't know you. You're the only person who knows the answer. But purely from what you've said in your message, it doesn't sound like extending your borrowing would make any sense. If you've got a small paid off portfolio and that is doing for you what you want it to in terms of allowing you to have the lifestyle you want, then all good. There's no particular need to roll the dice. But if you run the numbers and taking on a little bit of debt would allow you to acquire an extra property, and that property would put enough money in your pocket for you to see a significant difference in your lifestyle and make it worthwhile, then maybe it is something to think about. So Alan, I can't give you an exact answer. Of course, nobody can. But I hope that gives you something useful to be thinking about.
Well, that's us done for another week. Thank you so much. But don't worry, because on Sunday, we'll be answering more of your questions in the Sunday Times. Check out the home section and you'll see our smiling faces beaming back at you. And of course, the main event, the Property Podcast, will be with you on Thursday. So until those two wonderful events occur, take care, have fun. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.